He pointed. Not metaphorically. Not through a representative or an interpreter or the careful organizational language that surrounds a player of his stature like a buffer between his actual intentions and the public record of them. Shohei Ohtani pointed. At a specific person. In a specific room. And said, with the directness that has always been the most underrated quality of his public persona, exactly what he wanted. He said, him. He catches my next start. The room went still. Because the person Ohtani was pointing at had not yet signed a contract. Had not yet been formally introduced to the organization. Had not yet gone through the procedural machinery that converts a baseball player from a name on a list of possibilities into a member of a roster. And because the person Ohtani was not pointing at, the catcher currently on that roster, the professional who had been preparing for the assignment with the work ethic and dedication that nobody inside that clubhouse had ever questioned, had already said something privately that was about to become very public. Will Rushing had refused. And Tommy Edman was leaving. And Dave Roberts was standing in front of a microphone trying to explain, in the measured language of a man managing several simultaneous fires, how a single baseball season had arrived at an emergency announcement on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of a pennant race. The Edman news hit first. It arrived in the specific way that significant roster news arrives in the modern baseball information environment, not through an official organizational statement, not through a scheduled press conference, but through the converging fragments of multiple sourced reports appearing within minutes of each other on the platforms where baseball media operates in real time. Tommy Edman. Permanent departure. This season. The reaction was immediate and substantial. Edman had been more than a useful piece on the Dodgers roster, he had been a connector. The kind of player whose value is felt most clearly in the spaces between the obvious contributions, in the ways a clubhouse functions and a lineup holds together and a defense positions itself in the situations that don't end up in highlight packages but determine the outcomes of close games. His departure alone would have been the story. But it wasn't the story. It was the context for the story. The background against which everything else that day unfolded. The real story was what Roberts said next. He confirmed the Edman departure first. Handled it with the respectful brevity that a player of Edman's character deserved, acknowledging the contribution, expressing genuine appreciation, moving forward with the efficiency of a man who understood that the next item on the agenda was going to require significantly more of the room's attention. Then he said, "We have also completed the signing of a new catcher on a 3-year contract. His introduction will happen this afternoon. But before that happens, I want to share something with you that I think provides the most important context for understanding why this move was made and why it was made now." He paused. Looked at his notes. Then looked up. He said, "Shohei designated this catcher for his next start." That designation came from Shohei directly. He identified this person. He requested this person. And we moved to make it happen as quickly as the situation allowed. The room erupted with the specific energy of people who have just been handed a story bigger than the one they arrived expecting. The backstory of how Ohtani came to make that designation requires going back further than the announcement. Requires understanding a dynamic that had been developing quietly, visible to those inside the organization, invisible to those outside it, over the course of several weeks. Rushing had been struggling. Not with effort. Not with preparation. Not with any of the qualities that define professional commitment to an assignment. He had been showing up. Doing the work. Sitting through the film sessions and the pre-game meetings and the detailed pitch sequencing conversations that catching Ohtani requires at a level well above the standard major league preparation. But preparation and execution are different things. And the gap between what Rushing prepared to do and what he was able to execute in the actual, live, high-velocity environment of receiving Ohtani's pitches at full intent had been widening in ways that the numbers were beginning to capture and that Ohtani's own body language on the mound had been communicating for anyone willing to read it. The shakeoffs had increased. The hesitations before signs were given had lengthened. The moments of mid-inning misalignment, visible in the slight, almost imperceptible disruptions to Ohtani's rhythm that came when the call behind the plate and the call in his own mind pointed in different directions, had become frequent enough to constitute a pattern. And then, in a closed session that only a handful of people were present for, Rushing said the thing that ended the arrangement. He said, "I can't do this anymore. I'm not built for what he throws. I know that now. And continuing to pretend otherwise is hurting him." The honesty of that statement, the willingness to say clearly and without deflection exactly what the situation required saying, was something that Roberts would later describe as one of the most professionally courageous things he had witnessed in years of managing at the major league level. But professional courage, in this instance, created an immediate practical problem. Ohtani's next start was in 4 days. Roberts had a catcher who had just voluntarily removed himself from the assignment and a rotation slot that could not be moved without consequences that extended far beyond a single game. He needed a solution. Not eventually. Not after a thorough evaluation process. Now. He made calls that night. 3 separate conversations. 3 potential options. Each evaluated not just on the standard metrics of catching performance but on the specific, narrow question of who could step into the most demanding individual assignment in baseball with 4 days of preparation and function at the level that Ohtani's pitching required. By the following morning, he had a name. But Roberts was not the only one who had been thinking. Ohtani had been watching. This is one of the things that people who have spent significant time around him describe consistently: the quality of his observation. The way he processes information about the people around him with a completeness and a precision that most athletes reserve for opposing lineups and pitching tendencies. He notices. He catalogs. He arrives at conclusions through a combination of instinct and evidence that is both faster and more reliable than most organizational processes. He had been watching the available catchers. Watching film. Watching warm-up sessions. Watching the way different people behind the plate moved and communicated and positioned their bodies in the moments before a pitch was called, those small, preparatory movements that reveal something true about a catcher's relationship to the pitcher they are about to receive. And he had arrived at a designation before Roberts had finished making his calls. He went to the manager's office. He said, "I know who I want." Roberts looked at him. Ohtani said the name. Roberts was quiet for a moment. Then said, "That's who I was going to call next." Ohtani nodded. As if this confirmed something he already knew. He said, "Make it happen." His name is Rafael Soto. 28 years old. 5 seasons in professional baseball, the last 2 spent in a situation that the Dodgers front office had been monitoring with increasing interest, a talented catcher in an organizational context that had not fully allowed his most distinctive quality to express itself at the major league level. That quality was communication. Not the mechanical communication of signs and sequences and the technical vocabulary that pitchers and catchers develop through repetition. Something more fundamental. An ability to create, in real time and under pressure, the specific condition of mutual understanding that makes a pitcher feel not just caught but heard. Not just received but genuinely responded to. Former pitchers who had worked with Soto described it consistently and in language that was remarkably similar across sources who had not consulted each other. They said, "You never had to wonder if he understood what you were trying to do. You could feel it from the way he set up. From the way the sign came in. From the way his body positioned itself before the pitch arrived, already anticipating, already prepared, already in the right place because he had already thought through where the pitch was going to be." They said, catching him felt like a conversation. Not a transaction. That was the quality Ohtani had identified from the film he had watched. That was what had produced the designation. The 3-year contract was signed that afternoon. The terms placed Soto in the upper tier of catching contracts for players at his age and service level, a financial commitment that signaled not just a solution to an immediate problem but a long-term vision of what the Ohtani-catcher partnership should look like as the Dodgers built toward October and beyond. Roberts introduced Soto to the media with the energy of a man who had moved fast and was satisfied with where he had arrived. He said, "Rafael is exactly what we needed. His preparation is exceptional. His communication is exceptional. But more than anything, and I want to say this because I think it is the most important part of why we moved the way we did, Shohei wanted him. And when Shohei Ohtani tells you who he wants catching his pitches, you find a way to make that happen. Period." A reporter asked, "Was it unusual for a pitcher to designate his own catcher?" Roberts said, "Unusual? Yes. Surprising? Not from Shohei. He knows what he needs. He is the most prepared player I have ever managed. If he identified someone, there is a reason. There is always a reason." Soto spoke briefly and directly. He thanked the organization. He expressed genuine respect for what was being asked of him. He said the things that players say in introductory press conferences when the situation is significant enough to require care. And then he said something that nobody had prompted him to say. Something that arrived at the end of his prepared remarks with the quality of a thought that had been present throughout the formal part of the conversation and had finally found its moment. He said, "I want to talk about what it means to catch someone like Shohei Ohtani. Because I think it is misunderstood by people who haven't thought carefully about it. It is not about receiving great pitches. Any catcher can receive great pitches. It is about creating the condition in which great pitches become possible. About what you do before the pitch is thrown, how you set up, how you communicate, how you make the pitcher on the mound feel certain enough in what is about to happen that he can throw with complete intent rather than with any portion of his attention reserved for doubt." He paused. Then said, "My job is to eliminate his doubt. Everything else takes care of itself." The room was quiet for a moment. Then a reporter asked, "Have you spoken with him yet?" Soto said, "Yesterday. For 3 hours." The reporter said, 3 hours? Soto smiled. He said, he had questions. Good ones. The kind that tell you exactly how someone thinks about the game. We went through everything. Every count situation. Every sequencing philosophy. Every moment in a game where the catcher's decision changes what the pitcher is able to do. He looked down briefly. Then back up. He said, by the end of it, I felt like I had caught him 100 times. Like we had already been through everything together and come out the other side. That was the feeling. And I think that was the point. I think that was exactly what he was trying to create. Roberts closed the press conference with the Edman acknowledgement that the day had begun with and that the subsequent news had somewhat overshadowed. He said, I want to come back to Tommy for a moment. Because the day has been full and his departure deserves more than the context in which it was announced. Tommy Edman is a winning baseball player. He has been a winning baseball player every place he has ever played. What he gave this organization, in the games that people remember and in the ones that nobody remembers, was real. It mattered. And I hope the baseball world gives that the recognition it deserves alongside everything else that happened today. A reporter asked, does losing Edman create a problem for the roster going forward? Roberts said, losing any good player creates a problem. That's why they're called good players. We will address it. We address everything. He gathered his notes. Then said, almost to himself, the thing that the room had been waiting for without knowing they were waiting for it. He said, Soto behind the plate. Ohtani on the mound. 4 days from now. He looked up. He said, I suggest you find a way to watch.